Hi, everyone, and welcome to the last webinar on our series, Accelerating Talent Transformation with AI. My name is Nada, and I'm going to introduce our webinar's host and guests in a minute. Before we get started, I just wanted to say thanks again for logging in and let you know that I would love all of your questions to come in. Please use the questions panel on your GoToWebinar module, and I will make sure that Madeline, our host for today's webinar, gets them and answers them whenever she's able, or invites the panelists to answer them. I also wanted to remind everyone that we will definitely be sending a recording of this webinar out to everyone who's registered. So if you need to drop out and you can't listen to the whole thing, that is absolutely fine. You will find it in your inbox starting from tomorrow. A final reminder, as promised in the email that we sent out for registrations, people who send in questions for our panelists, or at least the first 10 people who send in questions for our panelists about some of the topics that we will be raising today, will receive an eCharity card to spend on the charity of their choice. So please send in your questions if you have them. We want people to get as much value of this panel as possible. So that was all from me for now. I will now invite our host, Madeline Lorano, to take over and introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Nada.
Madeline.
Thanks, Nada. I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you to everyone at Beamery for making this webinar possible. We have such an impressive panel today to talk about all things talent acquisition, technology, and AI related. So I'm going to ask them to all introduce themselves. I'll say we've had a few calls leading up to this discussion today, and I learned so much. I have to say, I've been talking about our conversations all for the past few weeks. So I'm very excited to hear more today and to learn more today. I'm sure you all are as well. So Yasser, I'm going to ask you to start and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Madeline. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Yasser Ahmed. I'm currently the Vice President of Talent at HelloFresh. Joined fairly recently in the last 2 months, previously at Zalando as their Global Head of Tech TA. Super excited to be here and part of this panel discussion to talk about AI and its effects on TA.
Wonderful. And I think what was so interesting to me in our first discussions is how big HelloFresh is. I mean, I'm a HelloFresh customer, but can you share how many employees work at HelloFresh?
Sure. So HelloFresh currently stands at 15,000 employees. We span across Europe, Americas, APAC, and we own a lot of subsidiaries as well. So usually the kind of brand is seen as quite a small brand. I've had people ask me, oh, so you must have 400 or 500 employees. Why did you go from one company to a smaller company? And actually, I went from Zalando to HelloFresh, which is similar sized companies, both of them roughly around about the 15,000 mark in terms of employees.
Yeah, absolutely enterprise and really cutting edge with the technology innovation that you're doing. So I'm excited to hear everything that you're going to share. And we're going to go next to Patty. And if you could introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Thank you, Madeline. I'm Patty Laughlin. I'm the Vice President of HR Technology and Marketplace at Highmark Health. Our Marketplace team supports project management and process improvement across our HR function. And again, very excited to be here and willing to talk about this, hot topic.
Wonderful. And I love the perspective you're going to bring as well with not just TA related, but broader HR technology too, and where that all fits in. So Megan, certainly not, last but not least, and our academic of the group and expert in AI. So could you introduce yourself for the audience?
Hi, I'm Megan Marie Butler, and I'm a research analyst focusing on applications of AI for HR. I'm also a PhD candidate at Leeds University Business School, and my expertise surrounds applications of AI for HR, people analytics, and ethical AI.
Wonderful, all huge topics today, and we're gonna dive right in because I know I have a lot of questions, and I'm sure many of you listening have a lot of questions too. We're gonna keep an eye on those as we go through the discussion today. So I'm just gonna start off, if we can just set the stage here about everything that's happened in the past year. Certainly there are new challenges, new pressures that you face at your organizations. And Patty, can we start with you? what are those most pressing challenges in talent acquisition that you're facing at Highmark today?
Now, I think for us at Highmark Health, I mean, one of the big things, I think everyone today, based off of the pandemic, is really looking at their life. And we are seeing some turnover and high volumes. We also have payer, provider, and diversified businesses. So obviously nursing is an area where we're consistently seeing and recruiting for, and just making sure that we are attractive in the market to bring the right people and retain the right talent. So that's definitely one of the big things right now. We have some of the highest volumes for recruiting that we've ever had. We're also in growth mode as an organization. So obviously it aligns, but just making sure that we continue to keep the right talent as well as find the right talent.
Yeah, absolutely. And Yasser, what about you?
I think the way I see it right now, candidates, especially the ones that are coming to us, they're really focusing on employer empathy. And that's really around kind of how human-shaped an organization is for the candidate now and what that will look like once they become an employee as well. So that stems out into lots of different substreams, right? So employer branding becomes a big part of the TA or an organization's kind of sell. And it also becomes a big part for their attraction campaigns, especially when we've got existing talent pools turning on their heads, where we are engaging with talent, and suddenly the pandemic has changed perspectives of an entire industry. People who were committed to joining our webinars or looking at our newsletters or talking and engaging with us suddenly want to know a bit more. So it's kind of reset us as a function, which has meant that there's a lot of attention on not just one thing, but D&I, our processes, biases in our processes, availability of information about our organization. Do we have gender pay gap reports publicly listed? And are we getting away with certain processes that we shouldn't be? Like, for example, should we be doing assessments and tests when the market is moving away from that? And so what we've done, and what I find is super important, is being very close to the ground and just being aware and being able to iterate as often as possible, so that we don't confirm a process and then stick with that process for years. Instead, we look at processes as sprints, almost, quarterly sprints, to kind of see where we can improve.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think both of the challenges that you're sharing, Patty, both you and Yasser, is this managing volume and this high growth mode, at the same time having to think about things like diversity, equity, and inclusion, empathy, candidate care, which is a hard balance, right? When you need efficiency, but you also have to think about the brand and the impact on candidates as well. What role, Yasser, I'm going to stay with you on this question, does technology play in all of this? As you're thinking about, addressing these challenges, does technology help or hurt the process?
A huge role. I think it would be naive to think it wouldn't save us time. And the whole purpose of technology, from my perspective, when it comes to an organization implementing new tools, is to automate, to be able to organize oneself, to save ourselves time, but also to do the manual tasks that a human being would do in a much more efficient way. So I think it plays a huge part in aligning us and kind of paving that way forward for the next year, 2 years, based on available technology, especially in the TA world, where right now AI, machine learning can make a big impact with kind of that large scale sourcing, large scale screening. There is questions about whether it's feasible at this stage, or there's still a lot more to be kind of matured in the AI space, though, from my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And Megan, I'll turn this to you. Is AI playing a role today? Is it where we need it to be? What are you seeing with the role technology plays in some of these challenges?
That's an interesting question, because there seemed to be such a clear pattern happening from 2013, 2015 into 2019, seeing a market grow. And then all of a sudden the pandemic hit, where now it's kind of a question of who's going to survive, who's going to thrive, and what we're going to see on the other end, because there's definitely been a lot of change up over the last year. But there's no doubt that we see HR continuously looking for solutions that are helping them, and AI offers a lot of opportunities. The way I like to think about it is through automation, engagement, and insights, and those are the main ways that AI is helping us. And if we're thinking about really specifically to HR, when we look at the market, we're seeing the two biggest areas of growth in and around skills. So we're talking about skills inferencing, recommendations, matching and searching, so that large scale sourcing. And again, there's obviously going to be questions. There's a lot of different organizations doing it. It is the largest area of the market. But I think that there's a lot of players that are starting to come out with interesting applications in that area. And the other big area of growth, and I think a lot of HR is starting to grasp onto, is using chatbots to help with the engagement process and kind of take away some of those redundant and repetitive tasks.
Absolutely. We just did a bunch of research on conversational AI and chatbots and the benefits it provides to candidates to get that 24/7 feedback, and then to recruiters too, to kind of lift that administrative burden that you're talking about with managing that volume. So I think that's a great example. Patty, what are some of the roadblocks that you see with getting the value from the technology as you kind of look at TA Tech today and you look at some of those challenges?
Yeah, I think there's a few things right now within, I just don't think that the machine learning and the AI is where we had hoped it would be to really get that total value that we need with the actual matching and the serving up of, for internal mobility and serving up what is the next job, what is my next career, or even serving up the right candidates at this point. Also, the time it takes to build the chatbot out for it actually to make sure that it's answering questions so that the candidate actually is getting the responses that they need and not increasing volume. And I also think it's just the buy-in, right, from the teams. They're used to, technology now. There's a fear, I think, from staff to say, I don't want this to take my job. So really getting folks to really lean in and understand how to leverage the technology in the right way so that we can actually utilize it to make us more effective and efficient. I think we're getting there in the technology, but it's just not where I would hope it would be to really get that total value.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I feel like 5 years ago, we were talking about replacing this role of, the recruiter with technology and the fear that people had. And I think that we're still there, right? We haven't seen, that clarity there. So I think that's really important. Yasser, what do you see from some of those roadblocks with getting the value out of technology?
Your current organization's data maturity is a big factor in whether you will be able to utilize tools properly. There are organizations on the adoption curve that are, early adopters, and they've got the most advanced thinking when it comes to how they look at data, or how they analyze, how they collect data. And then there's some organizations that are still struggling to find out their time to hire from a TA perspective. So data maturity in the organization is super important. Going to Patty's point around the TA maturity as well. See, with organizations, depending on the size, your TA team will go through a number of different phases of kind of maturing. And as they mature, their roles will broaden, and the sense of security will increase. And I think what's happened is that kind of COVID and a lot of other things have kind of held some people back, and they're not looking at how can I make my role redundant. Instead, it's how can I keep my role? And most people are kind of in protective mode. So that's also going to play a big part in, like, if I introduce this new tool that's going to get rid of all my scheduling, why do I need my scheduling team anymore? Or that, how is that going to affect us? So they could potentially look at the next steps and say, okay, well, if we've got schedulers, how can we make them candidate experience specialists? Or how can we make them candidate intelligence specialists? So really, it requires a full roadmap. And I think most organizations right now are kind of just fighting to keep their head above the water. So they're not thinking about this kind of the long-term effect of not trying to make your role redundant.
Yeah, I love what you did at HelloFresh, where you actually changed the titles of some of the roles so that they didn't feel redundant, but they also felt more empowering. Could you share kind of 2 of those roles that you changed?
Absolutely. So what we've done is, when you think of TA, 1.0. It's your kind of 360 recruiter. And almost 2 months ago when I joined, that's what it was. There were just 360 recruiters. And we think of now where we are in the Industrial 4.0, we kind of came up with this term in our own organization, which was like, we want to be TA 4.0, right? So how do we skip from 1 to 4 without doing the middle part? Well, we introduced new team members to our team, which were candidate experience specialists and talent engagement partners. So we essentially took the original role of a coordinator and we added 2 more layers to it. So they are now responsible for coordination, candidate experience as a whole, so the whole red carpet service, and then also talent intelligence. So really kind of focusing on talent markets and space. So we've given that coordinator now other areas to kind of expand their skill sets, reskill themselves so they can become specialists in other areas. Same for the sourcing, where usually you would have like your sourcing team just kind of working on building talent pools and maybe even communities. We've now focused them on specializing in marketing and employer branding and EVP. So they have now the ability to kind of expand their skill sets beyond just sourcing, but how can they look at marketing campaigns? How do they look at it as like a sales funnel almost and kind of reverse engineer it? So if we need to reach out to 1 million people, what do we need to do that? And looking at it like as if it's a sales funnel and kind of really thinking out the box. This has really allowed us to kind of come up with some innovative solutions at such a short pace of time, because as I said, it's only been introduced about 4 or 5 weeks ago. So when we were already kind of running 100 miles per hour. So I don't know how successful it will be, because it's a brave, bold move from my team, but we're definitely excited about it, and we want to be kind of the first adopters of this kind of thinking.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, if you think about what recruiters are going through today and all the administrative work and the burnout that we're all talking about, it's a great way to really empower them. I think it's a, we'll check in a few months and see where you're at, but I'm sure it's going to be very successful. So let's talk about just the TA tech landscape for a second. It's overwhelming. I mean, there are new startups that enter the market. I'm sure, I can't even imagine how many phone calls you probably get from startups, both of you asking, to start to demo and evaluate them. How do you kind of manage all of this, process? And I'd love to hear from both of you. So Yasser, I'm going to start with you. How do you manage this incredible technology landscape today and kind of weed out what's something you should pay attention to and something you should ignore?
So I have vendor calls pretty much twice a day. And demonstrations, because we've just introduced these new teams. So we're really looking at how we can implement new tools to automate a lot of our tasks that we do today. And I kind of go down with this 3 rules that I kind of stick with is like, is it automated? Is it going to save me time, or am I going to add more time? Am I adding more clicks to my mouse? And literally just the kind of manual tasks. I look at continuously learn. So how often do they adopt updates on their side? Because I'm assessing them as an organization and their philosophy of improving themselves, not just the tool, right? So I look at how often the tool is updated, how often do they iterate, did they pivot into this, did they pivot into something else? I look at how user-friendly the tool is, and then I'm also looking at, what is it actually doing? Because there's a lot of lip service, there's a lot of putting lipstick on a pig and saying, hey, this is the full works. We are machine learning AI tools, but then when you go into the demo, you find out that it's actually just a bunch of it's a semantics, and it's a bunch of rules that they put in place. Same with the chatbots. I've experienced lots of different chatbots, which, although they're chatbots, then you go to find out that actually it's kind of they're narratives that you build with the chatbot. So when you're talking and engaging with them, you provide them. So it's very hard to find and test each tool, because obviously that takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, and that means that it becomes a very exhausting exercise. So what we've done at HelloFresh is we've released our own tech TA radar, which is publicly available. So now our vendors can see what other tools they're competing with when they come to us. So the first question I ask them is what can you bring to us? And they just are extremely transparent. And that was because I was finding myself in multiple conversations halfway in thinking, what's the point of this? You know, what are you trying to sell to me? So I'm absolutely obsessed with my problem statement, which I make sure I'm crystal clear with the vendor. And if they can solve that, then great. If they can't solve it, if they can solve something else, even better. But you know, if they can't solve our problem statement, we kind of move on very quickly.
Yeah, I love the check radar. I went to check it out right away after our last call, so that's great. Patty, what about you as you kind of think about managing? I mean, you have to manage a lot of HR technology providers too, but how do you look for, you know, what's real versus what's not providing value?
Yeah, I mean, Yasser nailed a lot of the same problems that we deal with as well. And I think the biggest thing is, one is integration for us. Is it going to integrate with the tools that we have? Because we found, you know, if it doesn't integrate with our HCM system, then it's going to cause more manual work for us. Making sure that those steps in between for our recruiters are going to be reduced, really making sure that it's user friendly and really intuitive, because that's also a challenge, right? That change curve for not only your employees who are using it, but also your candidates. So making sure that it is user friendly and intuitive. And then always what's cutting edge, right? I think you get a lot of startups that try to talk to you, and then like Yasser said, when you get into the demo, it's definitely not what you expected. They pitch machine learning, but it's really not machine learning. It's really you doing a lot of the work on the back end, and the machine learning doesn't kick in for a very, very long time. So really understanding the quality of the tools is important before you make that purchase.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Looking at the quality and the quality of the data that they're using as well. Megan, I'm going to ask you the same question, but through a different lens, through an ethical AI lens. You know, I think ethical AI is an interesting topic because some companies care very much about it and others not as much as they probably should. What's important and how important is ethical AI in these conversations?
It's not just about the ethical AI, but how we use the tool ethically as well. And obviously it is an important point, though, like any other topic, business topic and business ethic topic, you're right. There's many people who don't think about it, and that's why we have sometimes such great headlines. For me, ethical AI fits underneath the bucket of risk. Because we're using a new tool in HR, there's obviously going to be risk associated with it. And not only are we trying to meet legal requirements, but also social viewpoints and opinions, which can change dramatically from year to year. Even in this last year, social opinion towards AI has changed, with people starting to realize how much they're being tracked, or all of a sudden something happens in another country and people start becoming fearful of something like facial recognition. So with all that constantly changing, we realize that, and also too with the EU's new regulations that are coming soon, they put out their draft recently that shows that HR and HR decision making is high risk. It doesn't mean it's something that we shouldn't do. It means that it's something that we need to do, but we need to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to actually do it in a way that is ethical, and that we're balancing the challenges of regulations and changing social opinions. And I think that this is where the ethics come in. So it's not just about the risk and the legal requirements of today, but what's going to happen in 5 years from now, 2 years from now, because there could be a lot of investment into a technology that in a few years is going to be obsolete for reasons, not because the technology didn't work, but because people have decided that we're no longer going to use it or use it in that way. But as I said, it's not just about finding a vendor that's doing it ethically. Organizations need to take on the responsibility of using the tool ethically within their own practice as well, which isn't just talking to a lawyer, that it's much more than that. It's really understanding the users and the impact on employees and the organization.
Yeah, I love that quote. I wrote it down. It's not just about ethical AI, it's about how you use the tools ethically. And I think that's a great summary, the responsibilities on both companies as well as these vendors as well. You know, it's interesting because some things have changed, right? Like facial recognition has, you know, become something that we're all a little skeptical about within talent acquisition today, where I think it was looked at as maybe innovative a few years ago. How do you see talent acquisition and AI changing with the new regulations from Europe, the AI regulations in Europe, and also the changes in candidates' expectations today?
That's a really interesting one. I think we're going to see kind of a twofold. And one that's going to surprise everybody more than anything is that people are going to want it. If we go with the Kano model, it shows that at first what seems as something very simple, like I always think back to my first cell phone that had a camera on it, and I could take 5 pictures, and it was brilliant. And you could have like those really horrible ringtones on it, and it was one of 2 of about 20 or 40 cell phones out at the time that could do it, and it was so important. Now, if you had a cell phone that couldn't take 1 picture, it wouldn't, like, what's the point of it? So if we're looking at talent acquisition and the candidate experience, a candidate that goes onto one job site and has something like a career assist, where all of a sudden their job search is completely different and they're able to go through hundreds of posts and find what matches to them, and they're actually seeing their own match scores, and they go onto another website where all of a sudden they're sitting there with keyword matches, they have kind of funky terms, it doesn't really work for them, they're not going to want to spend that time there. So there's going to be an expectation of using it. We also have the challenge of, we hear reports where people are fearful of AI. They don't want to do another interview with AI. But at the same time, there's just as many reports and research articles that come out showing that people are also interested in it. And a lot of people who feel that AI is actually an answer to what we know is already a biased and problematic system. So I think that with using it correctly, people are going to expect it in a certain way. And also too, as you mentioned before, having a 24/7 chatbot where they're able to ask questions. And in a past experience with even chatbots, the biggest surprise was always the questions that nobody expected people to ask. And like one of my favorites is like, where to park on your first day of work. And it's something you would never ask or think to ask, but all of a sudden you have access to a chatbot and people ask such different questions. The other famous story comes out of Germany, where notoriously in Germany, you don't ask about salary during the entire like job search and negotiation process. It's not until the very end. You have a chatbot on their website, all of a sudden the very first question every candidate asks is, what's the salary? So all of a sudden it can change how people do things and how people act in the interaction. So I think people are going to start expecting it more because it's already in other parts of their lives. And in that expectation, they're also going to expect it to work and to be used ethically.
Yeah, I think that's so well said. We're already using it in our personal lives and as consumers, and we're going to expect it in this as well. I think there's another example I've heard with onboarding where the number one question a lot of employees have when we used to work in an office and when we were back in offices is, do I bring lunch on the first day? Is my manager going to take me out to lunch? Is there free food in the cafeteria? The lunch question, and it feels embarrassing to ask your manager that question, you know, before you start. So that's a great question to be able to ask a chatbot or conversational AI and not have any judgment and get that answer quickly. So there's a question that actually came in, so I'm gonna stick on this conversational AI chatbot conversation. A question came in for Yasser and Patty to ask, are you using chatbots today? What's been your experience? And you know, how does that impact the candidate experience at your organization?
I can go first. So in HelloFresh, we are planning on using chatbots. I can't give like a recent example of what results that's given, but in my previous organizations, both at Zalando and at Wipro, we've kind of explored chatbots and seen that there is a high intake of users that in the beginning phases, they use a lot for questions, right? Or rescheduling interviews or what Megan said around the salaries. It really kind of gets rid of that wait that potentially candidates have to wait for their recruiter to come back to them. So that's why that convenience provides a lot. I think there is a bit of a gap though in terms of years of experience, the type of candidates you have in the process. So if we're looking at more executive senior leaders, we found that the adoption rates of the chatbots were pretty much zero, whereas you're kind of mass hiring more towards the bottom end of that triangle and kind of the mid-level roles, you would find a lot more adoption in terms of those kind of questions being asked, etc. So I definitely see the merit in chatbots. I'm curious to know if there is a way to find out how many mistakes chatbots are making globally and what we can avoid, or if there's like some sort of forum where, you know, all the different chatbot companies in the world kind of came together and solved them, because I feel sometimes that, you know, there's not one that does everything for me. There's always a bit of a gap.
Yeah, absolutely. Figuring out how to kind of break the bot. I've heard companies do panels on that. I think it's one thing I differentiate too, and I think you've brought it up and articulated it perfectly, is the difference between a chatbot, which is just loaded FAQs, like you're just loading, you have to do the work and kind of load in questions that are typically asked, and that's the response the candidate gets, versus conversational AI, which is learning constantly as it goes. It is omni-channel, so lots of different ways to communicate with candidates, and it's taking on the work, not just pushing the work off. So I think that's a big differentiator I see with some of the providers in the market. Patty, do you use any chatbots, or is this an area that's of interest to you, even in broader HR?
Yeah, so we actually do have a chatbot on our HR portal, and we launched it about a year and a half ago. We actually just did an upgrade this weekend and are upgrading our chatbot because, again, we were finding that it wasn't the conversational chatbot, right? The technology that we were leveraging for it, it was just a pilot. It was more of the FAQ type, really just answering those questions, repetitive. The machine learning was not strong. It was supposed to be conversational, but it wasn't what we were told, right? So that is something that we've upgraded now to more of, we are leveraging a new platform and really building out that chatbot from going from 35 questions to start to 75 questions. We also are launching a chatbot on our career site at the end of the month. This is the first time we're doing it on our career site. So obviously we'll see how that goes, but looking forward to reducing the calls to the recruiters and the candidates regarding the intake and the questions, and hoping that it'll help us and continue to build that out.
Yeah, that's a great example on the HR portal. That's tremendously valuable.
Can I just add on the chatbot point? I think one of the things I'm seeing more of now is chatbots used for employees. I recently was demoed a tool where the chatbot would occasionally check in with employees randomly, and it would come across as if it was an actual HR assistant having a full-blown conversation with them about how they're doing, what would they like improved. And it was a different form of surveying employees. Instead of doing these kind of pulse checks, you have ad hoc, sporadic check-ins across for every single employee over a 90-day period, as opposed to at the end of the month, you're going to do this survey. And they found that the results were a bit more genuine and a bit more authentic, as opposed to wait till the end of the month and then get results from everybody, and then the participation rates being low as well. So I feel like the leverage of chatbots is beyond just kind of your general conversation, but you can actually do a lot more with them if you kind of map out your process.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I mean, it's a daily check-in, right? And you're able to get more accurate data versus just what somebody's sentiment is on the day they're taking a survey once a year or once a month or whatever it is.
Yeah, and that's one of the big things we're hoping to get with, Ask HR, come in, actually be able to help employees self-serve more than, actually needing somebody on the other end of that phone.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about all of the new technology we've been talking about and the work that you have to do to kind of manage a lot of this technology, what are some of the new skills that are needed as you think about your talent acquisition team to be able to be talent acquisition technology champions? Patty, I'll start with you.
I think one of the big things is adaptability is something that you need, because obviously in the tech world, things are changing consistently. So being able to be a change agent and be adaptable, having technical and analytical skills are really critical in today's world, just because of the technology that's coming in place, as well as just strong communication and consultation. I think that is going to be critical moving forward to ensure that as we really adopt new technologies and we get more processes automated, it's going to be more about the conversation and the analytics that go into play to help drive change.
Yeah. Yes, sir. What about for your team?
For my team, we've mapped out quite clearly, we want people that are data-driven. So using data to help us make decisions. We want individuals that are self-driven. So we try to create our TA principles so you have your own compass, so you know what your North Star is as an individual, and you can almost make decisions autonomously for the entire TA function without having to go through numerous red tape. So for me, really focused on autonomy, data-driven, self-driven, and then I think the other part that what I find is going to be super important moving forward is just extreme transparency, being able to say I don't like this, I don't enjoy this, I think this process is broken, and being heard. A lot of the time this happens, it kind of gets mulled over into a long strategy that we're going to work on this, but I think there needs to be a way of just having a deeper conversation, understanding where things are going wrong in a team, understanding where those concerns are, why are those concerns existing today. And that's something I've been trying to drive at HelloFresh, and I think we're getting there. Still a lot to improve, lots of mistakes still to be made, but definitely I feel like creating that psychological safety is really important.
Yeah, and almost like a curiosity, it sounds like too, where to be curious why something's not working and be able to have a discussion around it versus just wait on it or feel like it's not important.
Well, they haven't, not we've been in a bubble for the last 2 years, almost a year and a half, right, where nothing really makes sense. You know, questions to the most basic answers to the most basic questions don't seem to exist, you know, even to the point where, should I wear face masks? Should I not wear face masks, right? So, you know, this frustration comes out in work, and it's up to us as employers and, you know, leaders to make sure that we are supporting our teams, giving them answers, helping them go through this as well. So yeah, I think being transparent is super important skill set for everybody in the team, not just the leaders.
Absolutely. Megan, I'm going to ask you the same question, but through an AI lens too. What skills are needed for a talent acquisition team or an HR team to be successful, especially when evaluating this AI technology today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think first and foremost, pretty much anybody working in HR is really going to need to up their game on relationship management. We're seeing that always happens with automation in industries. The roles that are changing are going to be less direct with the computer and more direct with other people. So that how to manage relationships, not just within your team, but with candidates, with senior management and all stakeholders. Number two, for most, if not all, it is, and we heard it from repeatedly here, is how to work with data, how to make decisions from data. This doesn't mean working directly and knowing statistics yourself, but how do you use data that you've been presented with as part of a decision-making process? So not relying just off the data, because that's another pitfall. We can't have a world of computer says, my favorite TV show. So how do we use data in our decision-making process? And I love that point about transparency, but it's also with candidates and employees. How is that decision being made? How is the data being used is going to become even more important. And then for some, but this is definitely a growing number, is the technical skills of working directly with people data and really understanding people data outside of statistics and other analytic functions within an organization. When we're working with people data, we have to remember there's a big difference. And I know in organizations, particularly with finances, where we run head-to-head most of the time, because in their world, a dollar is a dollar is a dollar is a dollar. You can interchange those dollars as much as you want. But with people data, we can't interchange people. So even if we can find generalizations within populations, we can't apply it in the same way. We have to be very cautious with it. So people who work with people data have to understand that difference and understand the nuances and social sciences behind working with people data. And I really love that comment about having a voice with this technology. Recently on a discussion with Iowa Psychology and developing assessment tools, it was really the question of if your organization has brought in a new tool and you have people within the organizations that don't agree with the recommendations made by the tool, how are you able to voice that opinion and to able to affect change? Or is it going to be a situation where organizations are going to say, no, the tool is correct and we're not going to take the person into account? So having that voice on both sides and on a management side, being able to communicate and understand the concerns. So I love that, having the voice, but also on the other side, being able to listen to employees and understand, because maybe the recommendations aren't coming through quite as expected. And we need to be able to understand that and pinpoint it early on, not a year later after you've gone to court.
Yeah, I think that employee voice is great, and so often doesn't happen until it's too late. Megan, you shared something on our last call that I'd love for you to just remind me of, and also share with the group here, is around ethics committees. I think, you know, for so long, and I still hear it, does a company need does the provider need some type of ethics committee to be able to show that, you know, AI is ethical and that this is truly AI. Where do you see that going and where is it today?
It's an interesting question. There was definitely the conversation around ethics committees a few years ago, and there was already a turn away from them. My reasoning that I like to explain it as comes from a story called The Lottery. Quite an old story and I haven't spoken about it. Lockdown has been way too long, obviously. It's a story from either 1940s or 1950s, published in the New Yorker. And it's a very dark and morbid story, but it highlights the fact that as a society, as groups of people, when we come together and we start to have group thinking, which in HR we already know is dangerous, we can do really horrific things. The last time I brought this up, someone brought up somebody from the Holocaust camps, and I was just like, yeah, exactly. But when we get into that situation, so if we have an ethics committee within an organization, you're already going to be askew to what your organization believes is ethical. So if you're going to have that, you do need to have outsider perspectives from the different stakeholder groups. The other thing is too is personally, as I mentioned earlier, the ethics actually falls under risk. So most organizations already have risk departments that can help understand the risks of engaging different AI tools. It's just a slight difference in how you evaluate them.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think, you know, you bring up assessments, and I think that ethics committee plays a role, especially in the assessment technology today. We had a question that came in, and I'm going to kind of put it out there to the group, is around, we talked earlier about assessments as one example, and the market sort of moving away from assessments possibly. And, you know, if anyone wants to elaborate on or what they see in the assessment space today, I definitely have a lot of opinions on this, but would love to hear from you all on this piece.
Maybe I'll jump in just because I said that, right? So what we've seen is, in particular for our tech organization, we're finding that the tech world is now moved to like a fully remote world or kind of hybrid world, and the demand for tech talent has increased substantially, which has led to a lot of requests for tech interviews or tech tests. And so a candidate is spending 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 hours even on a tech test to go through a process to not, before even doing an interview, they just turn around and refuse now because they're like, hey, I've got so many interviews lined up. I can't keep doing tech tests for every single person. So it'd be different. I think it'd be different if there was some sort of blockchain testing tool that allowed one test to then be used by multiple different organizations to say, okay, I've already completed this test and you can just use this as a baseline. But because each company is assessing for different skill sets and looking for different skill sets, there's the challenge there that how do you find something that is kind of proof enough? And so there is this kind of leap of faith that employers are assuming they're doing, but it works both ends. You know, there's leap of faith from the candidate and the employer. So for me personally, sorry, excuse my kids, summer holidays, so clearly they're not happy. There is this kind of assessment kind of limbo right now where maybe it's feasible for sales, marketing, and other areas, but where demand spikes for certain talent, you'll find that, you know, that talent then has the position to say, no, I'm not going to do this. And that's what we're finding. We're just finding it's not arrogance. It's just the way the market is moving. It's just who can offer the quickest in the shortest period of time. Well, if you don't do a test, that takes one part of the process out. Just means that there could be some repercussions in terms of the technical ability later down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see the same thing in the research that we do. I mean, it adds another step in the process. So I think for a lot of companies, it's like, do we want to add that extra step, especially when it's so hard to find candidates for these certain roles? And I think some of the assessment providers have done a great job of shortening the assessment. I mean, it can't be for a lot of roles an hour to take an assessment, but it still needs to be based on science. So it's finding that balance of what the right, and then also creating a better experience. It doesn't necessarily feel like taking a test. It feels more like learning about a role, you know, and going through the experience. Modern Hire is an example that does like a virtual job tryout where it's almost like you're experiencing what the role is like versus just, you know, taking a multiple choice test.
Yeah, and I think the big thing right now, I mean, we still do talent-based hiring. We have it more on the healthcare side than on the hospital side of the house because of those high volume jobs, right? But, you know, really making sure that they are a role fit for our organization and tie to our core values and core beliefs, as well as a skills assessment. So, but it is something we consistently vet because it does slow down the hiring process and potentially weeds out folks that may have been a fit.
Yeah. So we talked about AI and kind of where we're at today, and Patty, you said kind of it's not where it should, you know, we're not where we should be with AI. What would you want AI to solve for today that it's not currently solving for?
I think for us, and what I would love to see is that when we can really get our recruiters to be consultants, right? Taking out all the manual work that we need today, also serving up for internal mobility, you know, being able to identify, I think Megan stated, you know, the skills. Skills is the hot commodity right now. What are the skills that you have? What do the jobs that the skills need? And serving up those matches. I mean, ideal state, it would tell you, it would be able to go out there and scan and tell you these are your key candidates, you know, and do your sourcing for you to say, go get that right candidate to actually be there because they're going to be key talent for your organization. It's just not there yet. That's what hopefully it will be in the near future. But you know, we've heard this for a long time. It just hasn't pulled through. And like I said, the internal mobility piece is also not only on the front end, but the, you know, internally, how can we continue to develop our talent and serve up the right jobs or gigs to keep them, as well as, you know, keep them growing.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So I kind of really thought about this earlier today and yesterday as well when I was kind of looking at our TA strategy. And the more I think about it, the more I want it to solve some of the basic stuff that I struggle with on a day-to-day basis. Will we be able to hire the amount of people we plan to hire for the rest of the year based on our past performance of hiring, the current talent trends, the areas that we're hiring from? Should we look at build versus buy? I want AI to help me with decision making based on the data insights it has. It could teach me potentially at how to look at data in a very different way. You know, what is there potentially that I'm missing? What is my blind spot? I don't think we'll be able to replicate true AI as a human being. So it has the ability to do maybe a year's worth of work in the space of a few seconds in terms of analysis, etc. So for me, what I'm really looking for in the next 3 years is more around kind of talent mobility, talent attraction, like the strategy side, how AI can look at it from a data insights perspective. I feel like if it can make my role redundant, that would be, you know, the task I'd be looking to achieve as quickly as possible, because then we can focus on other things. As an organization, we could be a bit more transparent. We could decentralize the TA route and make it something that every employee is responsible for. I think that's kind of maybe fast forwarding maybe 25 years from now, but ideally, I'd say just to kind of wrap that up, I want it to make me as redundant as possible.
That makes sense. Megan, what do you see from kind of the research perspective on, you know, what AI should be doing that it's currently not?
I think right at the point in time we're at is that AI is making a lot of promises that it can't make, and that has been Patty's really highlighted that. In my research for the last few years, I keep seeing the marketing, the conversations being around a product and knowing the products in the market quite well, kind of going like, no, they don't do that. And so the reality is that they need to step up their game. But there's also in this, we're seeing a lot of mergers, acquisitions, purchases, which are bringing products together. If we looked at the early AI applications, I think a lot of the times why they underwhelmed was because they were, if they were very good AI systems, they're very localized. So they did one thing very specifically, very well, and it wasn't part of a larger system. And there normally wasn't that integration or conversation in between. And that's slowly starting to change. The other big aspect that's starting to change, and I don't know whether this is something we should fear or should support is there's obviously a need for much more standardization. And when we talk about standardizations, when we talk about skills, the fact that we have so many different taxonomies that exist, and when we talk about the level of a manager in the US, Canada, the UK, Europe, Asia, that title can mean completely different things, let alone what it's attached to, whether it's an office manager or a managing director. The role, one of my big shocks coming to the UK was everybody was a manager, and it had nothing to do with being a line manager. That was a new term for me as well, as a line manager. Where in North America, generally, if you have a manager, they normally have some sort of supervisory capacity and are dealing with other people within a team. Where here, you could be a sales manager and you're working by yourself and you're just managing the sales process. So how is AI and the taxonomy going to be able to understand those differences? So obviously there needs to be some sort of standardization. However, with the global aspect of it, it will definitely be a challenge. So I think that's where we're going to see a lot of improvements in the next few years, as a lot of people try and crack what I have affectionately nicknamed over the last few years, the skills code.
Yeah, and some standardization around that. Yeah, it's very interesting. You bring up such an interesting point that we didn't talk about, and I'd love to just quickly get Yasser and Patty's opinion on this. There's so many acquisitions in this space, and you probably have invested in providers that have been acquired or will be acquired in the next month. You know, how do you think about that? Is that, you know, positive or negative in your opinion, or depends?
I think it really depends. You know, obviously, when you're looking at companies and they have, you know, more equity to advance and be able to invest in the technology, that's always a good thing. But you need to ensure that, you know, you are investing in the right technology, and you don't want to invest in something that's not going to be there, or it gets too big that the service and the quality isn't there either. So you got to find that balance, as well as who's going to be a partner to support you in your strategy and your goals, to really determine who you really want to engage with from a technology perspective.
From my side, I think there's who's doing the acquisition, right? Because I've heard, and we've even contemplated kind of this hire model where potentially exploring purchasing or acquiring, you know, recruitment agencies to join to kind of merge into our TA team. And this is not in HelloFresh, but in other organizations. So acquisitions can be used in all different types of ways. My view on this is, you know, as long as the R&D is, you know, really invested in, and that's the purpose of the acquisition, then it sounds good. Where there is kind of this global domination plan where it's, you know, we want to expand in new markets and we want to be acquired so that we can expand in new markets, that's also fine as well. But then I guess it kind of removes the front from the fact that you're investing back into the tools and building, you know, full ecosystems. The other challenge with that is, as a product owner, you probably don't want to build an end-to-end system too early on anyway, because you're still learning and your customer base will change as you grow as an organization. So I think most founders are finding themselves in a situation as kind of catch-22. Do we grow really big as an organization and keep to our core services, or do we spend a lot of money into our R&D, but we're not sure if it's going to be feasible and applicable to everybody that's using the tool? So, and that's from the founders that I've spoken to. That's the feedback I've got. But you know, it's such a big industry. I doubt it that, you know, it's going to be too much of an issue.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it sounds like it's from both of you. It's really requires a thoughtful approach from the providers to really think about how they're going to support you and communicate with you on the value you're going to get, and, you know, the best. Wonderful. So I think if anybody has any other questions, I'll keep an eye here on the Q&A in the chat, and we'll get to them. We just have a few minutes left. So I'd love to just ask each of you to wrap up with the one piece of advice, even if it's just reemphasizing something that you said earlier, that you give to companies that are thinking more strategically about their TA tech plans or AI within their organization. Megan, I'd love to start with you.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Oh, sure. Just one piece of advice for companies, even if it's just reemphasizing something you've said earlier, as they kind of think about AI and think about TA tech.
One piece of advice. I think the biggest thing is if you're already on a call like this, you're in the right place. It's people who are aware, because I keep hearing the comments about feeling left behind or that you're not caught up or not at the forefront enough. And I'm trying to remember if the adoption curve and where people are on the technology journey. So many people are so far back with just trying to standardize data within their organization. But if you're aware of it and starting on that journey and starting to at least be to pay attention to what's going on, you're in the right place. If you're able to invest and actually start learning the technology, even better. But I think it's to not have fear of it is the best piece of advice, and to start exploring it and to start to see what's out there, because it may not be the magic wand or the snake oil kind of the magic potion that we all hope it would be by now, but there's definitely benefits, and it's not going away.
Great. Patty, what about you?
I echo what Megan's saying. I think the big thing is to lean in, as well as just to learn, research, and know what you're doing. And data is important. So if your data is not in the right place, that's the first thing you want to look at, because implementing a new technology on top of bad data isn't going to answer your question. So really lean in, assess the tools, make sure you have good, strong partners and evaluations before making a purchase, and then really just evaluating your data.
Great. Yasser?
Going off what Megan said, understand what it will take for you to get to that early adoption phase and work backwards. So, understand what the goal is, what you're actually trying to achieve firstly, and what you're trying to automate or what you're trying to improve, and then work backwards to see what processes you can do and what will it take to get there. So kind of taking it into an idea, into a plan.
Wonderful. I think it's great advice. And I mean, I wish I could have been taking notes during this whole session. I'm going to go back and listen to the recording, because I think there's just so much value here. And I'm sure everyone listening learned so much as well. So thank you all. I think one of the things I love most about this industry is people are willing to share their experience. That doesn't happen in a lot of other industries. And I want to thank all three of you for being here and sharing your experiences. And thank you to Beamery for sponsoring this webinar, for making it happen, and for inviting me to be part of it. So thank you all for listening. Enjoy the rest of your summer, and I'll turn this back over to Nada.
Thanks, Madeline, and thanks, Megan, Patty, and Yasser for doing this with us. It was absolutely wonderful, and I did take a lot of notes, Madeline, so I will share them with you. Thanks all for registering and for listening in. Please look in your inbox tomorrow for the recording for this webinar. And for those of you who sent in questions for the panel, please wait for your e-charity cards. Those are coming your way as well. I'm looking forward to seeing all of your names again in our next webinar. And yeah, that's it for today, and have a great rest of your day wherever you are. Goodbye.